Hey everyone, welcome back into some entitled people stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who thought their feelings justified their actions and met consequences they never saw coming. One involves a woman who decided a busy server was personally attacking her over a side of butter. Another, a wife who helped herself to her husband's belongings and planned to give away his gaming PC. And the last, a woman who grabbed a stranger hard enough to leave bruises and then sued her for assault. Here we go. Some people walk into restaurants looking for a reason to be offended. I've been serving on and off for over 6 years. These days, I only pick up a few shifts a month because I work a full-time 9 to 5 during the week. I genuinely thought my worst serving experiences were behind me, tucked away in my early 20s with bad managers and worse tippers. I figured I'd developed thick skin by now. Apparently, the universe decided I needed a refresher course. Last night was one of those shifts where everything that could fill up did. I had 8 tables at once, and they all seemed to need something at the exact same time. Drinks were coming up at the bar, food was dying in the window, and I was speed walking so much I was practically jogging. I could feel sweat forming at the back of my neck, which is never a great sign in a dining room full of people celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. One of my tables was a middle-aged couple and another woman who I later learned was celebrating her birthday. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They ordered drinks, asked a few questions about the menu, and I did my usual cheerful routine. Then the birthday woman asked for a side of butter. Of course, I said, I'll grab that for you. At that exact moment, the bar called out my name because 2 of my tables had cocktails ready. I ran over, dropped those drinks, checked on another table that had just gotten their food, and turned toward the kitchen. Before I even made it through the swinging doors, I heard her voice, "Hello, the butter!" It had been maybe 45 seconds. I turned around and said, still polite, "I haven't been to the kitchen yet, but I'm getting it right now." Then I went straight back, grabbed the butter, and hustled it out to her table. I'll admit I was moving fast. I set the butter down quickly because I had 6 other things happening at once. I didn't slam it, I didn't toss it, but I probably didn't place it down like I was presenting a diamond necklace either. I said, "Here you go," and moved on. Apparently that was the beginning of the end. A few minutes later, my manager pulled me aside. "She says you threw the butter at her," he said, trying not to roll his eyes. I stared at him. "I absolutely did not throw butter at anyone," I replied. He sighed and said, "I know, just keep being nice." So I did. I checked on them several times. "How's everything tasting? Can I get you anything else?" They mostly ignored me. The birthday woman barely looked at me. The energy at the table felt like a storm cloud forming. But I couldn't figure out what I'd done beyond not teleporting butter to her instantly. When I dropped the check, she examined it like she was auditing a multinational corporation. After about 5 minutes of intense scrutiny, I walked over and said, "Is everything okay?" That's when she exploded. "You ruined my entire night," she snapped. "You've been so malicious and rude. Your attitude has completely destroyed my birthday." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm so sorry you feel that way," I said carefully. "That was never my intention." She leaned forward, voice rising. "You were aggressive. You threw things at us. You ignored us. You clearly didn't want to serve us." She built an entire story in her head where you were the villain. You didn't deliver butter fast enough, so you must hate her. You set it down quick, so you threw it. 45 seconds of delay became proof of malice. There's no logic there, just someone who walked in ready to be offended. At that point, I felt my face getting hot. I knew arguing wouldn't help, so I said, "Let me grab my manager," and walked away before my own frustration showed. My hands were shaking slightly as I explained to him what was happening. He went over to the table and spoke with her while I tried to focus on my other guests. I could hear her voice from across the dining room. It carried. After a few minutes, my manager comped part of the bill and told her it was time to leave. Instead of just paying and going, she marched to the front where I was running a card for another table. She started in again. "You have no business working with people. You are a nasty, evil person." I felt something snap in me. I'd been polite, accommodating, and professional through every insult, but standing there, being berated in front of coworkers and other guests, something broke. "Stop," I said, louder than I intended. "Please leave me alone. I've been nothing but nice to you. Just leave." She gasped like I'd slapped her. "You can't speak to me like that." My manager stepped forward and said calmly, "She said exactly what I would have said. It's time for you to go." My coworkers who'd been watching this whole spectacle started backing him up. One of them said, "Ma'am, you need to leave." A couple of nearby tables chimed in too. "We saw the whole thing," one man said. "She didn't do anything." That only seemed to fuel her. She tried one more time to launch into another rant, and before I could stop myself, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Some people are just miserable." It wasn't professional, I know that, but after being accused of maliciously weaponizing butter, my patience was gone. Eventually, she left. The dining room slowly returned to its normal hum. A few tables stopped me to reassure me. "You handled that way better than I would have," one woman said. Another told me, "Don't let her ruin your night." But even with all that support, I couldn't shake the feeling in my chest. My adrenaline was still high. My hands were trembling when I picked up the next tray. I kept replaying the interaction in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I'd set the butter down too fast, if my tone had shifted without me realizing. Logically, I know this was her issue, not mine. I was overwhelmed, yes, but I wasn't rude. I wasn't malicious. I was busy. There's a difference. Still, it rattled me in a way I didn't expect. I've dealt with impatient customers, entitled guests, even people who snap over small things. But being called evil over a side of butter while sweating through an 8-table rush was a new one. I guess no matter how long you've been in the service industry, someone can still find a way to surprise you. Some people don't walk into a restaurant looking for dinner, they walk in looking for a target. And last night, apparently, that was me. And our second story. My wife thought silent treatment meant I wouldn't notice my fishing rods, pre-workout, and eventually my $1,500 PC disappearing. I noticed. I, 26-year-old male, have been married to my wife Emma for 4 years. She was a social work major who I met in one of my gen ed classes. I explained to her I was a mechanical engineering major. She then asked if I could tutor her in math, and that's how we began dating. Afterwards, I decided to get my master's in Japanese to help me gain more career opportunities. My wife thought it was a silly idea and said she wouldn't be funding it, so then we decided to keep our finances separate. It wasn't a big deal since I was still working anyways. I just had less free time, so she was making more than me during this time. It paid off, and I recently landed a high-paying job, and with that came more stress due to me having to travel to Japan often. I've really been wanting to get into gaming, so I invested in computer parts costing around $1,500. Once I took the parts out of the box, my wife noticed the receipt and asked how I could be so irresponsible with my money. She assumed I still made the same amount, but when I told her that I made triple that amount, she began giving me the silent treatment. During this time, I began to notice my things were going missing. I wanted to go fishing with some friends one time, and when I was looking for my rods, she must have noticed and said she'd given them to her uncle. I told her not to take my stuff without asking, but didn't mind too much because they were old, so I just bought some more. Another time, I was about to go to the gym and I was looking for my pre-workout. I always keep 3 jars. I luckily had a can of Monster, and that helped. I asked my wife when she got home from work, and she said she gave them to her cousin. I asked her to reimburse me because they cost $50 a jar. She said I make enough to replace them and just ignored me for the rest of the day. One day when she thought I was asleep, she was talking to someone on the phone explaining how she's going to move my parents into our house. She hadn't explained this to me. We only have 3 rooms. One is her office, one is my office/game room, and the other is our bedroom. She told the person on the phone, who I assume is her sister, that she's going to give my gaming setup to her brother to make room and that I'll get over it eventually. So today I left work early to catch her in the middle of her plans. And when I walked into our apartment, her and her brother were then placing everything into a box. I asked what was going on, and my wife, whose face was pale, said she was cleaning when her brother came by. I asked him, did he plan on taking my computer? Of course he denied. So I went in the room to get the iPad we share, and I looked through the texts on there, and it clearly shows my wife telling him when to pick it up and to deny that he had it. I told him to get out and asked her, why does she think she's so entitled to my stuff? I've never yelled at her, so I guess this scared her because she began to cry. She ended up packing a bag and went to stay with her sister. While she was out, I picked up a lock for my office. Her sister texted me, calling me an a-hole. And our last story. Some people need to learn that keeping your hands to yourself isn't optional. This woman learned it in court with dental bills and legal fees to match. This happened last year, so some of the smaller details are fuzzy, but I remember exactly how it felt. I have a traumatic incident in my past that I don't talk about much, but one of the lasting effects is a severe phobia of being touched unexpectedly. It isn't mild discomfort or a simple flinch. It's full-body panic that takes over before I can think. Even my boyfriend, who's been nothing but patient with me, asks permission before putting his arm around me if we're sitting together. Because once, years ago, he hugged me from behind and I screamed, dropped to the floor, and cried without even understanding why my body reacted that way. With that context, here's what happened. I was at my usual grocery store after work, trying to figure out what to make for dinner. I kept changing my mind, which meant I was walking back and forth between aisles, returning things and grabbing new ones. I was standing in the pasta aisle, staring at an overwhelming wall of choices, debating between penne and fettuccine like it was a life-altering decision. The employees at this store wear green or blue polos, aprons in the opposite color, and black pants. I was wearing a bright yellow sundress covered in white daisies. I could not have looked less like an employee if I tried. While I was focused on reading a label, I heard an "excuse me." I assumed I was blocking someone's cart, so I moved mine aside without looking up. A second "excuse me" came louder and sharper, the kind of tone that suggests impatience rather than politeness. Before I could even turn around, an arm shot out and grabbed my bicep. It wasn't a tap, it wasn't someone lightly trying to get my attention. She grabbed me hard enough that I had a deep bruise for weeks afterward. The second her hand closed around my arm, my body reacted before my brain could process what was happening. I screamed. My free hand flew up and made contact with her face in what can only be described as a reflexive slap. I wasn't aiming, I wasn't thinking, it was instinct. The woman stumbled backward and fell onto the tile floor. Then the screaming started. She began yelling that I had attacked her, and to my horror, she started spitting teeth onto the floor. I stood there, shaking, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears, trying to breathe through this sudden rush of panic. My vision tunneled for a few seconds, and I had to focus on staying upright. An employee rushed over almost immediately. He knelt beside her and asked, "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need help?" She wasted no time launching into her version of events. "Your employee just went psycho and hit me for no reason," she shrieked. "I asked her for help and she assaulted me." The employee blinked and said, "She doesn't work here." But before he could finish, an older man who'd been at the end of the aisle stepped forward. "I saw the whole thing," he said calmly but firmly. "She grabbed her first, hard. The young lady defended herself." The woman on the floor glared at him like he had personally betrayed her. "That's not true," she snapped, still clutching her mouth. The older man didn't budge. "Check your cameras," he told the employee. Then he looked at me and said quietly, "You're okay. Just breathe." Later, when things settled down, he told me he recognized the symptoms of PTSD. He said he'd seen that kind of reaction before and knew it wasn't random aggression. I don't know if that's what prompted him to speak up so confidently, but I'll always be grateful that he did. The employee asked me to wait while he called the manager. He disappeared briefly and came back with a bottle of iced tea. "Here," he said gently, "just sip this. You're safe." I remember holding that bottle with both hands because they wouldn't stop shaking. When the manager mentioned reviewing the security footage, something changed. The woman who had been wailing dramatically about her missing teeth suddenly stood up with impressive speed. For someone who claimed to be grievously injured, she quickly moved toward the exit. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and bolted out of the store. She grabbed you hard enough to leave bruises, then ran the second cameras get mentioned? That's not someone who was wronged. That's someone who knew exactly what the footage would show. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. A few weeks later, I was served with court papers. She was suing me for assault. My stomach dropped when I opened the envelope. The idea of being dragged into court over something my body did instinctively to protect itself made me feel sick. My lawyer, however, was calm. After reviewing the store's security footage, he said this is not going to go the way she thinks it is. He prepared me for the hearing and told me to wear the exact same yellow daisy sundress I'd been wearing that day. In court, the store employee showed up in full uniform, green polo, blue apron, black pants. My lawyer held up a still image from the store's cameras showing me in the aisle. He then asked her directly, "Can you explain to the court how this dress resembles the store's employee uniform?" She had no answer. The footage clearly showed her reaching out and grabbing my arm. It showed the force. It showed my immediate reaction. It showed that I did not pursue her or escalate anything after the slap. Her attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as the video played. Eventually, her lawyer apologized to the court for wasting its time. The judge dismissed the case and ordered her to pay my legal fees. It was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Walking out of that courtroom felt very different from standing in that grocery aisle. In the store, I'd been shaking and overwhelmed and afraid of what would happen next. In court, I felt steady. Not triumphant, not proud, just validated. I didn't choose that reaction. I didn't wake up that morning planning to knock someone's dental work loose over pasta, but I also refused to feel guilt for defending myself when someone decided grabbing a stranger was an acceptable way to get attention. If she'd simply used her words and waited like an adult, none of it would have happened. Instead, she learned an expensive lesson about keeping her hands to herself. And I learned that sometimes, even when your body reacts before your brain can, the truth still shows up on camera. The common thread across all three stories isn't the butter, the PC, or the bruises. It's the belief that feelings alone justify actions. Story 1 shows what happens when someone externalizes their frustration. The woman felt impatient, so the server must be malicious. She felt unheard, so the butter must have been thrown. Every inconvenience became evidence of a conspiracy against her. She never once considered that a busy server might have 8 other tables. The story isn't about service. It's about the refusal to extend the same grace to others that we expect for ourselves. Story 2 shows entitlement dressed up as marriage. The wife didn't steal. In her mind, she was redistributing household resources. Fishing rods, pre-workout, a $1,500 PC destined for her brother. None of it required discussion because she had already decided his success was hers to manage. The silent treatment wasn't anger, it was permission to take. The question she never answered: at what point does ours become yours when you're the only one moving things out the door? Story 3 shows the most dangerous form of entitlement, the belief that your needs override someone else's physical autonomy. She grabbed a stranger hard enough to leave bruises, then played victim when instinct took over. Story 3 wins for me because it exposes how far someone will go to avoid admitting fault. She could have apologized. She could have used words. Instead,